Good morning, my name is Maciej Andziński. I'm involved in Adam project where we do some data analysis, and today I'd like to tell you about the classification of .cz domains. There are more than 1.3 billion .cz domains and many of them remain inactive, and our goal in this study was to evaluate the number of .cz domains which are active. And by saying active domain, I mean a domain which either hosts a non-parking website or it runs a mail server. And in order to do such evaluation, we used DNS crawler. This is a tool developed by nich. Basically, it crawls over the servers configured for a domain, and it provides data about services configured for that domain. And we ran DNS crawler and we scanned all the .cz domains on 23rd of October, and we gathered around 200 gigabytes of data, which we subsequently analyzed. This dataset contained web content, which we collected for every .cz domain, and we did it for various combinations of IP version, web server port, prefix, etc. We also followed all the HTTP redirections. So there was a set of contents for one domain name, and to have just one content for analysis, we selected the longest one. And our goal was to identify so-called parking websites. A parking website, it's kind of default website for a domain name that is registered but doesn't host a real website. Here are example screenshots of such parking website which we identified in .cz. In most cases, they simply say that a domain name is registered, but there is no web content, that a web page is under construction. Sometimes they say that a domain name is for sale. So in order to detect such parking websites, we developed a machine learning classifier. The input for our classifier was the web content provided by the DNS crawler. It was preprocessed. We simply extracted visible text from HTML, but we didn't do JavaScript rendering. So it was just based on the text that we were able to get using the DNS crawler. And our classifier was able to label each .cz domain names with one of 4 labels. There were 2 main classes indicating whether a domain hosts a non-parking website or a parking website. But there were also cases when we were not able to get the content because the web server was unreachable, there were HTTP error, or simply the content was empty. So we introduced 2 additional classes, no content and HTTP error. So at the end, there were 4 classes: parking web, which means a domain hosted a parking website; active web means a domain hosted a non-parking website; and no content and HTTP error. And some details about the classifier design. We basically based on so-called TF-IDF. This is a NLP concept which takes into consideration term frequencies. Basically, we compute the term frequency in a document and the frequency of such term in the corpora. So having that numbers, we are able to identify words or terms which are important for a document. And our dictionary consisted not only of words, but of so-called n-grams, which means there were phrases of length of up to 3 words. And we, of course, did some more pre-processing, such as removing stop words. We trained our classifier using the data we gathered for domain report. Basically, every year for domain report, we do manual classification for a sample of .cz domain names. So that there is a sample of size around 1000 domains, and we manually classify each domain. And we use this data set as our ground truth, and we train the model using this data. And we achieved accuracy 92%, which means for a batch of 100 domains, 92 domains were classified correctly. There were some interesting findings about the dataset. We were able to identify popular phrases for each class. And for example, for parking website, such a popular phrase that quite frequently appeared in the content was domena zaregistrowana, which means domain registered. And for non-parking websites, such a popular phrase was všechna práva vyhrazena, which means all rights reserved. And here are the results. We can see that more than 60% of domains host an active web, which means a non-parking website. Around 20% of domains host a parking website. And for another 20% of domains, we were not able to get the content because there were unreachable server, empty content, or HTTP error. And we did analysis of correlation between the classification result and domain age. And we can see this analysis on the chart. An interesting trend can be observed that older domains were more likely to host a non-parking website. And for example, for domains older than 20 years, this percentage was around 75%. And on the opposite side, domains registered last year were only in 50% hosting a non-parking website. We also did analysis of the classification result in relation to domain label length. And here we can spot that 3-letter domains were kind of special because they were less likely to host a non-parking website or to have a web content. Basically, we believed it could be explained by the fact that this group of domains is kind of special, like they are often registered for profit or to run a second level registry, etc. And we did similar analysis for mail service. So we labeled each .cz domain name with one of two labels: active mail, if there was a mail server for a domain, and inactive mail, if there were no mail server for such domain. We also used DNS crawler data. Basically, DNS crawler checked 3 popular ports: 25, 465, and 567. And if it was able to connect to one of these ports on the mail server configured for a domain name, then we marked a domain name as having active mail. And it turned out that around 70% of domains have active mail server. And again, we did similar analysis of the correlation between domain name age and classification result. And here a similar trend can be observed, that older domains were more likely to have active mail. And when it comes to domain length, an interesting trend can be observed. We can see that domains of length from 3 to 6 letters were more likely to have a mail server. We can probably explain it by the fact that the people simply prefer to have shorter domain name in their email address. And finally, we aggregated the data about web content classification and mail service, and we did final predictions. So when a domain had either a working mail server or it hosted a non-parking website, it was marked inactive. And if there was neither a non-parking website for that domain nor a mail server, then we marked such domain as inactive. And the results of final classification, we can see that around 80% of domains either had a non-parking website or a mail server. So we consider these groups of domains as active domains. And on the opposite sides, 20% of domains were classified as inactive. And here are some results for registrars. The x-axis we have number of domains per registrar, and on the y-axis there is percentage of domains with active web or mail. So we can see that this percentage ranges from 30 to 100% depending on the registrar, but for big players it's around 72%. And we also checked DNS traffic. Basically, we counted number of distinct DNS sources for a domain, because we believed the more sources appear in DNS queries, the more popular domain is. So on the chart, we can see cumulative distribution of the number of sources of DNS queries per domain. And we can see that active domains were much more popular than inactive domains. However, we can still observe that there were queries for inactive domains. And to conclude, in our study, we discovered that around 60% of .cz domains hosts a non-parking website, around 70% of domains run a mail server, and around 80% of domains either hosts a non-parking website or run mail servers. And we also observed a correlation between the classification result and domain name age and domain length. And one remark has to be mentioned. We only investigated the mail service and web service, but domain name can be used for different purposes. For example, it can run different services. It can only run subdomains. It can run a second level registry. There can be some corner cases, but we believed that web and mail services are the most popular, so we can get some picture of the DNS ecosystem just by looking on these two services. So other services were out of scope of our analysis. So that's it. Thank you for your attention.